Broccoli Gardens, Lucy McGregor from the Garden Wall Project, Convenience Gallery, LUVA, and then Lock-in Brighton. So the structure of the chat will be, so each organisation will have a presentation which will last like just under 10 minutes, get to know a bit about their space and their journey, and then we'll have question time at the. So our first speaker of the evening is Broccoli Garden. So if I pass it over to you and you can introduce yourselves. Thank you.
Yes. I guess I'll take over the reins for a minute. My name's Thomas Gregg. I'm one of the co-founders of Broccoli Gardens, and Billy Crosby is somewhere around. He can say hello. So yes, I don't know if I'll maybe start screen sharing. I can start doing. This is our first slide for Broccoli Gardens. We are myself and Billy, we run a little gallery space in Broccoli in southeast London. This is just a nice image to start it off, and I don't know, not really much to say. I'll move on to the next slide. This is it in real life. So originally Broccoli Gardens started in May 2019, and it was run by 5 of us. So there was 5. We all went to art school, so it was myself, Billy, Bethan, Mel, and Jessie. And how we basically got the space is Mel used it as her studio originally. She found out that basically me and Billy were interested in potentially running a space in a little garage. So we approached her, and etc. We basically started a stream of shows from May till September 2019. At that point, the 3 of them decided to leave as Mel and Jessie moved out of London. So me and Billy took it on as ourselves. And at this moment, I think we've run about 12 shows with a large range of artists. So I'll take you to the next slide. This show was Painters Posting Paintings, and it happened in December 2019. It was been set up by Joseph O'Rourke, who graduated in Edinburgh. And myself and Billy met him at the John Moores Painting Prize in 2018. He actually started this, I think it was with like about 15 artists or so, where people would post work to each other and they would collaborate. So this actually was this show took place in Edinburgh and in Manchester, and I basically liked it, and I wanted to make it come down to London. All these drawings were for sale and still are for sale, I guess, but we didn't really get too many sales, which is totally fine. We don't really push a kind of commercial driven aspect, but then again, I mean, even a couple of sales was nice, just to have a little bit that got put back into the garage. So I'm going to jump a little bit more. This is actually present. This is going to be our next show that we're going to be having. The image at the bottom is of a studio visit that we had with an artist called Simon Tosky, who's based in New York. Basically myself and Billy have loved his paintings for quite a while and wanted to basically get some in the garage. And we managed just before Christmas to basically get some sent over. It's been a bit of a right faff. I mean, I've never actually tried to get paintings from New York or anywhere in another country. And it was a bit of a mission trying to sort out the whole customs deal. But that's just a little plug-in for him. I mean, this will be happening when we come out of lockdown. So that'll probably be earliest April, which is really exciting. I mean, you can see his website, etc. But I think now I'll pass it over to Billy for this slide.
Cheers. Yeah, the rest of the shows that we did, we sort of worked quite closely with the artists, and we found that the garage allows basically someone to focus sort of into something quite specifically. Because of the scale of it, there isn't scope to think about a show as you sort of normally would. So the conditions that gave rise to the garage like really shaped the artwork that can go on, which is nice because it's sort of a fairly no-nonsense shows. There's not a lot of sort of like guff and other stuff that can go around sort of like what a show is. There's like nowhere to hide really with it. And it means that you can sort of, well, we've not been doing private views because of lockdown. So we just like, people just like turn up for like, we just basically send us a DM on Instagram. And so it means that sort of the interaction people have been getting with the work during lockdown, and well, private views are basically social things. They're not very good in terms of like actually looking at work. So it's been really nice. Like, who doesn't like having a nice sort of like one-to-one with the thing in a space? Like, it makes it a bit more intimate, this sort of, I don't know, the exchange that goes on. As you can see, the view from the road is very striking. This is a show we had by the most recent one by an artist called Neil Rumming. And yeah, you sort of just get a sense of it being just right there on the street in the neighborhood, and like people just drive their cars by and like often will just like reverse back and like look out the window or maybe drive off again. But a lot of people just will, I don't know, come out and have a look. There's a church opposite. We get lots of people from the church coming in. Yeah, which is everyone sort of seems to be very like positive about it. Even, you know, if we, I don't know, like this show has a dead soldier in it, we don't really get that much negative feedback, which is nice. You sort of don't feel like we're being too sort of like disruptive in the neighborhood. Like the neighborhood feels very supportive. There's a school next door. There's like, I don't know, we get a lot of ad hoc sort of community engagement of the street that is organized basically, which is really nice, and lots of good conversations from that. The name Broccoli Gardens came from a 5-person sort of consensus when there was 5 of us. And I think in our experience, at least running what this endeavor has become, it being 2 of us means that we have a bit more sort of creative power, I guess, over sort of like focus over what we want to do, which is like a bit more responsibility and risk, but maybe sort of more of a reward. It's not like, yeah, that's just sort of like how we've been running this. I'm not, yeah. So yeah, we sort of had this name that was a bit like no one was like 100% on. So the broccoli thing is a way to like make it sort of memorable, I guess, and to hang it on, and also sort of has like a bit of humor in it as a way to sort of distance it, I guess, from sort of traditional sort of gallery like models and archetypes. And we also have an archive of everything we've sort of done behind the scenes on the website, where it says with the bees and the caterpillar. So this is another more sort of a more generous sort of personable thing that is put on the website to try and sort of mean there's like less of a gap, I guess. Yeah, I think that's the end of our brief presentation. Thank you very much.
That's great, thank you. So for another project, which is also based in Brockley, I'll pass over to Lucy McGregor with her garden wall project.
Hello everyone. I just wanted to say a big thank you to LUVA for having me here, and lovely to see lots of familiar friendly faces but new ones as well. And my pronouns are she and her, and I don't know if you can all see me, I'm in the green dungarees, not that I want you to particularly look at me, but just if you need to locate me. Great stuff. So yeah, also based in Brockley as well. Garden Wall has been sort of created, founded by me, Lucy McGregor, as sort of a, I guess, a response to not being able to get into a studio to make, having this overgrown, crazy garden space and this wall that I recognised as like a safe sort of barrier for people to look over and encounter art, but also encounter art with plants and overgrown plants as well. So I invite you digitally and visually, be it not in person, hopefully one day, through this little short video of some of the garden sort of growing, being planted, and I'll speak a little bit more about the beginnings of the project as well. So Garden Wall is a nomadic alternative art space which is formed from a domestic lawn which was found at my old address in Brockley in southeast London and has recently relocated because I have moved 2 roads away, so still in the same local area. And the sculpture garden, it's sort of come about through a lot of local exchange, and initially was prompted by a collaboration with Deptford X Festival and Volunteer South London, in where I was speaking to a local resident called Andrea, and over phone calls we were sort of discussing our mutual interest in gardening. And Andrea is disabled and not able to leave her home because she was shielding, so this was my sort of way to create sculptures in response to her ideas and show them into sort of a public encounter so people passing by could see the artworks, which again I guess was thinking about the galleries and the museums that perhaps a lot of us would regularly visit were shut, and there was a sort of new conversation with actually art and ecology and these sort of pumpkins that I was growing, and they were growing around the sculptures and sort of actually physically becoming intertwined with the sculptures, and at points moving them and moving in this sort of like seasonal change as well, with sort of the weather, which can be lovely one minute and chaotic the next, infestations of caterpillars like this little guy here, which was a bit of a nuisance to the plant that it was eating, but they were actually really beautiful and another sort of strange audience to interact with as well, I guess. And yeah, I sort of was finding this sanctuary within the garden space. For me, during lockdown, I wanted to still be able to make something, but have perhaps a different conversation with the weather outside that was this unpredictable change, which I guess correlated to what was going on in March last year, and sadly, strangely, still is going on today. And I think my pace of like thinking and making just sort of naturally had to slow down as the rest of the world was. And I just would find myself sort of sitting and looking out, observing my garden space. So I naturally started to just read a lot, and I came across Olivia Laing's Funny Weather, which was this treasure trove sort of responding to art in an emergency, but more in relation to the global warming situation, the AIDS crisis, art in relation to racism, just to name a few. And I was really drawn towards what she was speaking about, of creating this separate, different kind of time frame and different timeline that we could sort of react and process and make our own paces to responding to that. And for me, that really resonated with the garden, how it would have these moments of needing to just be left alone and not touched. And, you know, within a day of really intense sun, there'd be all these weeds and creatures that had then moved in there. And of course, Olivia Laing then led me to Derek Jarman, which was another great artist that I'd heard of before, but not really fully, truly, like, given the appreciation and time that him and his Prospect Cottage project deserves. And that in itself, again, was really lovely to sort of read his dated entries in time with the days I was planting the garden, besides having these strange sculptures next to the plants. And the garden sort of became this seat of creativity in which I could take a step back, but also take a step forward as much or as little as I pleased, and very much like a sustainable ecosystem to make from as well. And I started to mess around with sort of using natural dyes from weeds, which again are often seen as these like pesty things in a garden, but actually have a lot of functional and beautiful properties to them. And using weeds as a making material to actually map the garden as well, which prompted this piece about the garden, which was literally to scale, but imagining again the garden, what happens when the garden's a sketchbook, or what happens when the garden leaves a garden, and does it leave through an object like this one, or like by a plant pot, or by the seeds that, you know, are released by the plants growing there and dispersed to someone else's garden. And this sort of fluctuating blurring of the boundaries of like, when does the garden start, when does it end, who's allowed to enter the garden, who am I to be digging up this garden? Lots and lots of questions. And this sort of idea of rewilding the garden as well, and letting the garden be a space to project potential ideas onto, but not necessarily immediately doing them, or other days very much so doing that. And came across this great article in Spike Island magazine's titled Plants, and Louis Rosenberg talks all about the vegetative world and, you know, the sort of possibilities of dealing with something that's overgrown and sort of foreign. As humans, we have this natural instinct to categorize things and control them and tame them. But he describes the garden as actually being the surface underneath that we don't often see in the hidden garden. And I couldn't help again but think about this in relation to sort of the creative process and how a plant sort of behaves like an art object, you know, giving it time to grow, or the plant also being a member of an audience, or a plant being a collaborator, or very much the artist as well. And, you know, my neighbours becoming an audience, becoming collaborators, becoming almost founders of the project and the garden as well. And yeah, these are some little flowers from the garden. And this symbol for me, I know it's like a scientific symbol that I recognise from school, that I wouldn't be able to tell you the name of it, but I sort of understand the gist of this equilibrium, or like exchange, but also an ethical exchange of collaboration. There's a lovely old lady called Barbara who lives close by the garden, and when we sort of create this first exhibition in the space, she came by and was speaking to me how she'd seen the pumpkins growing over the past few months, and she just really enjoyed sort of this familiar thing and watching it literally becoming sort of a monster. And then when the pumpkin finally fruited, I took her some of the pumpkin pie, and then she brought me back this lovely jerk chicken meal that she'd made, and was telling me all about the aloe vera plants that grow in her native country in the Caribbean. And it just sort of prompted a lot of like really lovely and supportive, I think, as well, this sort of support of recognising people locally were feeling really isolated and quite lonely and not having necessarily things to keep themselves occupied or sane. And this garden became this like pivotal sort of whirlwind, which was really, really great. And yeah, grew into these strange sculptures of chunks of concrete and cast snails that again were found in the garden, and pavements nearby and their markings. And to sort of gain a bit of, I guess, awareness, input from neighbours, I worked with friends, creative people as well, graphic designers, including this questionnaire that I designed with Joseph Fessy, who's also my cousin. And we just sort of dished them out all down the street and attempted to create some sort of conversation. You know, if people were scared to come out personally because of COVID and everything that was going on, there was still some element of exchange and discussion, be it written rather than oral, or visual if they wanted to come by. And even that then generated this literally localized typography where we could piece together this logo for the space as well from the neighbours and their handwriting. And again, of course, this whole project was coming about when all the Black Lives Matter movement was happening. And very much, I think there was a lot of time that I had to take as a person curating, building this garden, and recognising that, you know, a lot of gardens, public, private gardens, are built upon colonialist histories and had this really problematic past. And I just had to think a lot, research a lot, and talk a lot about this quite heavy, difficult context of a garden, and also the fact that not everyone has a garden or has access to a garden or has access to the outdoors. You know, individual circumstances, be it a disability or be it your health or various other things. So I think for me, just trying to understand my own positioning on that was really important. And again, was just supported by these conversations with neighbours, which again, don't get me wrong, there was times when I'd have questions asked and be really thrown off guard or not sure or feel uncomfortable, and maybe people that I was speaking to would as well. But generally we received a really great community response and a lot of positive input, which were captured in these little sort of conversational artworks as well. And I think can't but help return to Derek Jarman, who described the horizon as the boundary of his garden. You know, his sculpture garden was in Dungeness, which is this really flat, barren landscape, and sort of presents this quite spatially equal space, which I couldn't help but get out of my mind with the garden and the street and this sort of equal land. You know, everyone's sort of given the same point of entry in the sense that you've got the one wall, the same street. Yeah, people that are local sort of, you know, have that leeway to get there easier than people who are further away in London or not even in London. But very much so now the garden is behaving in a way online as well on our Instagram. We've got a website with some reading materials up on there that we hope people locally can, you know, sort of have a read and a research into if they would like to, and opening up discussions with friends and collaborators that's now growing into this online publication as well. So there's a lot of new collaborations that have emerged from this garden space, and like, you know, planting a seed, it takes time to grow, but hopefully will bloom into some more great flowers and fruits and pumpkins that I can eat and Barbara around the road can eat as well. And yeah, there's our little Instagram and website if anybody's interested. And yeah, thank you. Sorry, I've fully rambled on there a lot, but yeah, great to share the research with you all more as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. That was really interesting. It's nice to hear as well how it's like had an impact on your neighbours, and how you describe them as kind of becoming like a part of this, and it's kind of a community thing, especially during lockdown. So yeah, it's really interesting to get to know more about it. So thank you. Up next we have Convenience Gallery, which also is quite a community kind of based project. So I'll pass you over to Convenience Gallery to introduce.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Ryan from Convenience.
Yeah.
Andy's on here somewhere. Don't know if he wants to say hello at all.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Ryan, my pronouns are he, him, and yeah, for anyone on here, I am wearing a black hat, grey shirt. I think I've got blue eyes. So yeah, basically Convenience Gallery is a contemporary and community art gallery and collective based in Birkenhead, which is run by me and Andy. We predominantly do this work voluntarily, and we work in creative partnerships with sort of artists and organisations and the community around us, offering a space for people to engage with art outside of like what we sort of perceive as like a normalised context, doing this by bringing it into like direct public spaces. We had to go on to the next slide. Yeah, so this is our sort of first home and the sort of start of our story. So we got the opportunity to have our space in Birkenhead Market, which is something we never really expected to get. This came through sort of just asking the council if we could utilise the space and them agreeing with us, which was surprising. So yeah, from this we agreed a peppercorn agreement and got the opportunity to run it outside of this market stall for 6 weeks. This 6-week project turned into sort of 6 months, so we sort of grabbed the opportunity and yeah, thank you. We began to run sort of a series of open conversations with artists both nationally and within our local community, and this is how we sort of shaped our core ethos and goals for the gallery. The main feedback from this was that people wanted more ways to access the art, and this was delivered through our sort of core exhibition, workshops and talks program. We learned at this point that people were more receptive to having these conversations around visual art, like placed within their sort of like immediate and direct environment. So obviously the market, like people were there sort of day to day, going to shops and all that. And then we had our gallery like directly within that space. So I had some really interesting conversations come from that. And we sort of continue to use open conversation to shape and support the work we do. So we continue to operate Convenience from a variety of public spaces as a result of the learning from our original placement within the market. Yeah, if we can shoot on to the next slide. So during this first period, we sort of developed a core understanding of what our programming was going to look like. This was and still now is 6 to 8 core exhibitions a year, working with artists at sort of varying career stages with a real focus on supporting them to develop their practice. We've also like run this alongside a growing number of like other interventions and opportunities that we are sort of continuing to grow throughout our work. Yeah, so we've developed a series of workshops, giving artists the opportunity to work directly with our community, that being within the market and directly around us. Yeah, these ideas were then like the hopes that they could be taken to other spaces and delivered, whilst giving the artists sort of the opportunity to understand how to fund themselves. We also understood this was an important space where the community like really heavily engaged with the artists and really opened the conversations around contemporary art to the wider community. It's sort of like particularly important like within our area in Birkenhead, which is just on the outskirts of sort of Liverpool and the Wirral. It's an area of sort of low cultural engagement and low cultural art in this time. So we also co-designed a series of lectures called Thinking Out Loud with the aim to deliver academic learning of the Liverpool John Moores faculty and their research to the public. Each talk was free to access and was followed by a curated creative session to support the theories, and the discussion around this research was like really important for us. Sort of coming to the end of our time at the market, which lasted during this 6-month period, we developed a new partnership with the Open Door charity. So this was to support the running of their progressive mental health space and culture venue, which was the Bloom building. So we started this by running workshops, but developed into the core base of our Convenience work. So this was running all the exhibitions and events from this space too. We've also sort of the culture leads for this space. So alongside our own programming, we also develop like the wider programming engagements that go on within this sort of culture venue, with the aim to create sort of like a modern vision of a sort of like community hub. If you just go on to the next slide. So at the start of 2020, which, you know, as a year we now sort of look back on and think like sort of a bit negative with some of the stuff, this was where we sort of launched our first program in our new space. This meant sort of growing our partnership out and delivering work alongside the Open Door, again with this focus of placing like arts and culture alongside mental health and well. Our work within the Bloom has allowed us to sort of work alongside the Open Door charity, their members, the mentors and their team. And a key focus of this work is to create new opportunities for young people, and with a focus towards the betterment of skills, sort of like learning and mental well-being, which is like not something we originally started out with, but through this placement in a community space we've kind of like developed from. So this has meant like continuing to run our core exhibition and workshops, but during the pandemic, obviously we've worked alongside the charity to curate and design a bespoke program of opportunities with the public in mind. So a project that really represents this working within our current placement is Horizons. So this is going to be a youth project delivering learning around contemporary art practices and ways of thinking. So it's a 10-week educational process involving a cohort of artists to deliver sort of underrepresented practices that stand outside of like traditional arts education. We're sort of like really excited to run this. This is a pilot currently, and we're hoping we can extend this out to deliver like a full program of Horizons across the year, with the aim to involve like more young people and artists across. Next slide, please. Horizons for us has been like a really good example of how we've like worked to support artists. So this project's been like an accumulation of all of our learning since we started the gallery. And our current sort of support method through this is like one-to-one and group support with them. So this is like different sort of creative sessions and workshops. We've also been like working with artists to understand like what they want to achieve from working with us, and trying to make sure we tailor our support and our programming towards those like goals and aims, which is sort of like personalized and individual to each artist. We're also currently working towards, well, we are delivering current like artist fair pay in line with the artist network, and we're trying to like expand that out across our entire programming, so that being the exhibitions and any other programming following around it. So we're sort of doing this by working with like local partners to secure more funding opportunities for the artists, and just to make sure these projects can be everything we sort of aim them to be. Next slide, please. We sort of understand that there is always like continued support, so we are continuing to work with different partners outside of our current sort of projects. So these currently sort of represented by small funds and tailored like personalized support, as well as some external commissions, which we will be launching over the next couple of weeks. So tomorrow we're going to be launching a support fund for artists between the age of 16 and 24, and then in a time we're going to be launching one that is for artists in 24 and above, which will also run alongside tailored and personalized support from the gallery. I think like in relation to the COVID pandemic, we haven't really tried to sort of force convenience and on the artists that we've worked with into the sort of digital environment. However, we've sort of like spoke to each artist within the program to try and understand how best to deliver their work, or whether it was worthwhile pausing to last. So to run alongside that, we also delivered a number of community-based projects across our social media channels in collaboration with the Open Door charity to make sure we continued our engagement with the public. But I think one of the best outcomes of our understanding of sort of the digital environment during this time has been Al Bulger's Growth Infinity. This was originally intended to sort of be placed within the physical like gallery environment, but as a point of learning, we decided to like move it into the digital space as it sort of best fitted the work. And like working with Al has helped us to understand like how digital exhibitions, working through stuff like Itch and our website, it's kind of really helped increase our encounters, and we're sort of much better suited to the themes. So from this, we think we've sort of had like possibly a better engagement almost through this online intervention that we might have had physically due to the COVID restrictions. So from this, we're sort of working to develop a digital residency space with convenience that like runs with the exact same focus that our physical exhibitions. We're looking to launch this towards the end of the year. So the last thing to mention is like the sort of pandemic and this time around COVID has really offered us like a period of reflection. So we've had time to grow, and we sort of use this to further understand our sort of funding and our sustainability and propose future projects. So we're just sort of hoping that with all this together, we're really able to like give as much benefit to the community around us, like past the sort of direct community of the artists. So over the next few weeks and months, we're going to be launching a lot of these opportunities and projects alongside our full 2021 programming, which we're hoping won't be, we're hoping it won't be sort of messed around with COVID, but we'll have to see what happens with that at this moment in time. And we're also developing a number of other opportunities to run alongside this. So we're building a pop-up exhibition space that we're hoping to sort of take around our local area and hopefully beyond, that we can launch a sort of secondary program with artists. And we're also looking to deliver large-scale public projections and interventions. So these are going to be placed within the streets and our local environment, sort of utilizing like the disused buildings around our area as a conversation point for the regeneration and access to culture. We're sort of really hoping that Birkenhead will become a sort of destination for culture, like outside of Liverpool, and not just like a mirror to what goes on in Liverpool already. I think, to be honest, like that's everything. We're just sort of really excited to get back to working with the public. So thank you for listening, and that's it.
That's great. Thank you to Convenience Gallery. That's really interesting. It's nice to hear how you really do support like the artist in your community as well, and about like your forthcoming projects. So thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you.
Up next we have LUVA.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So, hi everyone. I'm Bea. I'm one of the co-founders of LUVA. My pronouns are she, her, and I have shoulder-length brown hair, and I'm wearing a black turtleneck jumper. So what is LUVA? LUVA is an experiment, a gallery, and a social hub. We're open every last Thursday of the month from 6 to 9 p.m, the sort of usual private view hours before COVID happened. So currently we haven't been open every last Thursday. We ask critical questions about the context of where contemporary art exists and how cultural institutions can have meaningful dialogues with both local and non-local audiences. During each event, we're also committed to function as a food bank collection point for First Love Foundation. It all kind of started off in 2011 with LUPA, which is Lock Up Performance Arts, which was co-curated by Rachel Dowell, Kate Mahoney, Jordan McKenzie, and Aaron Williamson. It exhibited over 150 performances by national and international artists before it closed in June 2013. Jordan McKenzie, who lives on the council estate and owns the garage, sent out an open call in September of 2018 to diploma and professional studies students at Central St. Martin's to build a co-founding team for LUVA. Once we set up our team, we quickly set up our first exhibition on the 27th of October with Emma Talbot. How does LUVA operate? So we're a group of recent graduates, about to graduate, and not yet graduates. There's currently 11 of us, but since 2018 we've had a regular turnover of people who've run the garage, as well as have different as we all have different commitments and times we can dedicate to this project. As well, on top of that, we're either students or practicing artists, so there's so much we can give. So we work with the basic give and take fundamentals within the organization. We all work on a voluntary aspect, so no currency is involved, but our give and take approach is that we have this mentoring scheme for the DPS students, and it's a sort of trickle down effect. So the members who've been at LUVA since 2018 can trickle down their learning experiences to people who've joined us in September. We encourage emerging artists to exhibit with us, but we've also exhibited more established artists who have always given us positive feedback about the freedom they have in our space, which is something that is missing in more established institutions. Learning experiences, so we've been very lucky to have this physical space to organize exhibitions, but when we started back in 2018 we had bare minimum experience on setting up exhibitions. The first thing we learned was what day to have our exhibitions on. So the first show was on a Saturday afternoon, and unfortunately we had a really small turnout. So we quickly changed it to match private views and when people were out and about, which made a huge difference. To spread the word, just like most people do, we use social media to advertise our exhibitions, but we don't want to make the assumption that everybody has the opportunity to find our space on the internet, and so we post physical newsletters to everybody who lives on the council estate where the garage is based. Since we're all practicing artists, we share our own tools that become the gallery's tools for installations or deinstalls. And then when it comes to internal communication of the gallery, we have weekly meetings, which usually would happen in the pub, but now they happen on Teams from our homes, and we keep up to date on a WhatsApp group chat. So yeah, so the first panel discussion we actually hosted was for ArtLix weekend in 2019, which followed the theme of interdependence. The panel discussion was composed by Alex Fafega, Eduardo Padilla, Anne-Marie Creamer, Eleni Zacariou, Adelaide Bannerman, and Anna Hart. And this opportunity came about because we built a strong relationship with ArtLix, as they would list our exhibitions monthly, and then they proposed to us, well, you're an artist-led space, why don't you take part in this? Which also meant that we were part of the ArtQuest Workweek Prize. And what was special about this weekend is that the organisation of the event showed solidarity from nearby galleries, such as Auto Italia, who kindly lent us their chairs to hold the discussion itself. So First Love Foundation. So since the beginning, we followed the idea that the garage was a continuous functioning space. So during the month, a car is parked in there, and when it's transformed into a garage for those 3 hours, we believe that it can benefit the community by not only showing art or being able to show artwork of emerging artists, but by being a food collection point. So instead of selling tickets, we invite our audience to bring food donations at each event. These are little milestones. We open in October of 2018. By August of 2019, we'd hosted 10 exhibitions and had a successful fundraiser. The fundraiser was composed by postcards that artists we had exhibited or other artists had donated to us, and people would buy the cards without knowing who the artist was. So you could have ended up with a postcard by Victoria Sin, or by a more recent artist who just graduated. In March of 2020, we'd hosted 16 exhibitions, the panel discussion, the blind sale, but had to close our doors due to the pandemic. And in response, we set up an open call, which was make something that makes you feel good, as we have this commitment of a sort of feel good approach. And then January of 2021, we're back online and extremely happy to be able to host this event. And we've rebranded. So instead of being LUVA, we've become Lockdown Visual Arts until we can open our doors again. So our future aim and goals, we're setting up this mentoring scheme with DPS students. Again, as I said before, it's this trickle-down effect of passing down skill system. We want more exhibitions and more interactions with the local community. So we've updated our website and we're setting up our own tutorials, because we found that by teaching, we're learning. And we were following this how can we help attitude. So again, adding resources and sharing other gallery spaces. But that's all from LUVA. Thank you.
Thank you. So last but not least, I will pass over to Unlock in Brighton.
I was on mute, that old classic. Hi everyone, that's been really interesting to hear about everyone's practice. I've done the thing where I've now gotten so nervous I've forgotten why I've set up a gallery, so you'll have to bear with me. But so Gallery Lock-In is based in Brighton, and I set it up 4 years ago. It's made of 2 garages I've knocked together, and it originally started out as a space for durational performance art solely, because we didn't really have a space for that in Brighton. But now it's kind of, I sort of do socially engaged exhibitions. I try and, I think, like everyone else here, move away from kind of market-driven artwork, so things that, you know, don't sell, so installation, performance, that kind of thing. So giving artists the space to think and create without having the kind of the nagging about, will this sell, and do I have to, you know, sell so many artworks to pay rent in this gallery space? So I give the gallery space for free to people. A lot of work I do is to do with things like censorship. So I've had a couple of exhibitions working with LGBTQ plus communities in Russia and the Ukraine, and I kind of bring work over here that's been censored at home for them, and sort of give them a voice for things that they're not allowed, they don't have the freedom like we do to say and to express. And I work a lot with artists from China who are considered politically dissident as well. So again, I bring works over here that they're not allowed to show over there, as well as doing the performance and things. What else do I do? Oh, the gallery's painted black, which is kind of unusual, some people find. That was for sort of many reasons, but I find that sometimes when people walk into a white cube space, it immediately makes them silent and they get a bit nervous and they think they don't know anything about art and they don't want to talk. So I think with the black space, I have people come in and the first thing they mention is the black wall. And I say, oh, you know, why do you like that? And they say, because things stand up better on black. And I say, so you do know something about art. You can tell, you know, how things, and we kind of get chatting in that way. So I think it makes people a bit less nervous, and it's easier for my upkeep because white is hard to keep white when you have a garage space. So also one of the things to kind of note about sort of my practice as a curator, I started out as a performance art curator, and I take that over to the curating I do now. And one thing I'm quite interested in is spectatorships, so especially when it comes to performance art. So I don't let people take images of any work that they do, or there's not really any images of the gallery space, and that was to do with kind of encouraging this real interconnectivity and this kind of real-time relationship between a person and their body in a space and how that relates to the performance artist's body in the space as well. So especially with durational performance, because it's so difficult and kind of can be quite harrowing on the body, and I wanted spectators to kind of mirror that as well by being present in the space. So rather than people saying, oh, what was that like, and I'll, you know, show them a picture which they can just glance at and gloss over, you know, I want people to, I tell them a story. You know, the history of that performance piece is now is oral, and for me an important part of the kind of oral archive as well is when you talk about something and someone imagines it or remembers it, it goes into the realm of thought. So they think, you think about it and you kind of consume it in a productive way because you assign meaning, whereas if you're just consuming images constantly, it can be quite a passive affair, and it's kind of what you know through your senses rather than through your thoughts. So that's kind of one of the reasons I'm against images. And also a lot of what I do is kind of by word of mouth, so it's not on social media or anything. So I want people to come to the space, so which has been hard over the pandemic because we can't. But so yeah, I'm very much all about, you know, people seeing things in real life and having that connection and being aware of their own body in the space, but also they're being aware of themselves in relation to other spectators as well. So yes, that kind of started as quite an interesting project. Before I got the gallery, I used to run a program called Lock-In, and which is where the name of the gallery came from. And what I would do, I'd actually lock people in a space and no one was allowed to leave until the performance was over. So a lot of people will become quite disturbed or quite distressed or find it very entertaining, or they'd find, you know, waves of boredom and then entertainment and then horror and all these things. And it was really funny how people created a mini society. So people, you know, they weren't getting up to leave because they wanted to share this experience with other people. So, you know, they could leave. I couldn't legally keep them there, but they had these kind of social contracts with each other, how they didn't want to leave. And so it's almost creating mini societies that can go on to create their own mini meanings together. And I think since that, a lot of people who were spectators for that have kind of, they remember each other and they say, oh, do you remember that time that Beth locked us in and there was a pig's head on a stake, you know, so things like that. So yeah, I like to shock and upset people because I think sometimes things can be a bit easy and, you know, we should be kept on our toes. And another thing, I think sometimes I think we can kind of we see things as too available. If everything's online or if there's an image, things are almost too available to us, and we get lulled into this false sense of security that we can access everything all the time. But what I want to remind people is this is always mediated. You're not actually accessing it, you're accessing a mediated version of this because it's being shared on the internet or through images. So, you know, it's not wholly non-political, should we say, in that sense, and that's what I want people to discuss as well. So although I seem maybe a bit of an old lady because I don't use social media or do anything online, that's you know, there's kind of reasons behind that. And yeah, so, and oh yeah, this kind of the curatorial framework I work in is the physical, social and psychological boundaries of the body mind. So I kind of use boundaries and limitations as a trajectory and as a starting point, and how limitations can be taken not necessarily always negatively. They can be used, you know, boundaries to start something, I don't know, kind of, it's, yeah, taking kind of boundaries and limitations as like an inspiration to create something rather than not be able to, I suppose is what I'm getting at there. And and I think that's kind of it from me. So thanks for putting up with that.
That's great. Thank you very much. It's nice to hear like how you want people to be so present in the space and kind of how that is challenged at the minute. So yeah, thank you. We have some time for some questions. If anyone does want to put anything in the chat on Teams, we can go through some of those. But I'll get the ball rolling with one question from us, which kind of is nicely in response to like Locking Brighton's talk just then. So like, do you think galleries require a physical site, or is there like more scope for especially like artist-led organisations to exist more digitally now as a result of the pandemic?
It's a good question. It's very timely. And sort of in between lockdowns, I did an exhibition called Body No Body, and it was an exhibition in the physical space and an exhibition online, which was quite scary for me because it's not something I do at all. And myself and the other curator had kind of a lot of deep discussions about this, because I was very much sort of saying, we need to have a physical aspect, we need things to remain physical in the real. And she was kind of like, but how can we represent this kind of fight and stuff? And I think for me in particular, for someone who doesn't do digital, I'm happy to wait and bide my time rather than putting something terrible out there. I'm happy to wait because there's lots of good digital stuff going on. But for me, because it's so much about physical presence and stuff, I still think this needs to happen. And whether it's kind of, I think as the guys were saying in the first one, you just open a garage door and people just walk past and stuff at their leisure, or they just see it, rather than having an exhibition that can be open. Even that is, for me, that's quite special and can't really be replaced by the digital, unfortunately. And another thing, a difference for me is probably based on language, I suppose, is for me, I kind of find sometimes, unless the digital exhibition is of digital artwork, for me, it's not an exhibition, it becomes an archive. So if you're taking images of things and putting them in an exhibition space, so it's a language kind of argument based there. But for me, that's quite important, because as with performance art, as soon as you take an image or record it, it becomes a different medium, it becomes a different thing, it becomes a document rather than a piece of art. So that's, so keep up the physical. That's my answer.
Yeah, that is really interesting how, I guess, things like when you take a photo of something, is that the artwork, or is it kind of just a different document that is kind of existing? So yeah, a question for Lucy McGregor with your garden wall project. Just really interested in how people are engaged with the project, and do you think like more unconventional settings for exhibitions could kind of be the way forward to create this kind of really engaging, interesting space?
Yeah, I think there's definitely something which I guess everyone's touched upon, of this like actual in-person encounter, which, as an outside space with, it's sort of unlocked, it is very open for if people want to pass by, they want to stop, or, maybe they didn't stop the first time but then come back around and then they're like, oh, we'll have sort of a chat. But our first exhibition that we had, we sort of linked up with the Broccoli front yard sale, which was like a community-based, socially distanced sort of thing, which brought together like a few different audiences. And I think even the meeting of those two audiences and like the translation between what one group were coming to look at and expect, and another group coming to expect to be able to like buy something from a sale, and then we're like, oh well, no, there's art objects. And then even that discussion about buying an art object. But yeah, it was funny, I had some neighbours that didn't come to the initial opening, which was very much like not a proper opening because of COVID stuff, but a lady that came over like a few weeks later when the sculptures were still there, but they were like in a much different state from rain and stuff like that. And it just, there was a lot of like really just lovely moments that sort of came with the time of people being confident enough to actually ask about what was going on in the garden, whereas there were some neighbours that literally didn't refer to the art objects there at all and just purely cared about the plants in there, and vice versa with other people. So it was interesting to see the features within the garden, what brought people's interest and attention and what didn't. But I think there's definitely scope. I think even just like the windows, all the kids that have been putting artworks in windows and like the chalk drawings on the street, and sort of a big shift towards postal art, and yeah, people putting like talking to neighbours by putting a big poster in their window. I think it's just changed perhaps how we have, well, it has, hasn't it? It's changed how we have to communicate. And then, you know, does it go online? Is it the right space for something to be online? Is there like a weird blurring no man's land or everyone's land in between where like there's some translation that wouldn't normally happen? So yeah, I think there's lots of food for thought with all those kind of discussions for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting. So following on from like such a domestic setting of like the garden space, like Brockley Gardens being like a fellow lock-up space, how do you find working in such a kind of unconventional and quite domestic setting as well? Like obviously a garage usually has many different purposes other than a gallery space.
You want to take it, Billy? Oh. No.
Perfect.
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
So as you're in such like a domestic setting, an unconventional setting, like how do you find like you navigate that with like the usual purposes of a garage are so different to a gallery space? So how do you find using a space like this? Like how does it benefit you?
It's really weird. Yeah, you can hear me. Yeah, it's the decision to like turn a garage into like a white cube-ish space in the first place is like just funny. Many people just comment about turning up the thing in real life, because often you don't really know what sort of to expect, and it's kind of like it's just funny that you've even got the inside of a garage that's sort of like turned it into a white cube. And because of that, I don't know, it sort of creates a space which is like somewhere between like the work is really dictated by the fact that it's in a garage, but sort of doesn't look like it at all because it's got this like trappings of a white cube that people sort of seeing as being sort of like neutral. So it's like an interesting space and energy to do stuff there. Like in terms of wider sort of like me and Tom don't live, like we're both like half an hour away, and so it's this sort of like in between zone. Like Tom's in Hither Green and I'm in Kennington. So and we haven't been doing openings for like this, we've done like 2 for like the past year or whatever, and so it just exists. Like we'll get like a DM on Instagram, it's like 90% of our viewings, and it will be Sunday or 4 or whatever, and one of us will just like nip on a bike and sort of like head over. And it's weird, like we now have this relation to this like little neighborhood in Brockley that we don't sort of live in, but we know like all the neighbors, and sort of like, yeah, I don't know, it's an interesting sort of space. And it's a shame, it's sort of a bit like Lock-in Brighton. It's sort of like it doesn't really exist online, like in any sort of real sense. It's definitely sort of IRL or like endeavour, and we're fine about that as well. Like it's something that there are friends that have like the house, so that we're sort of they let us just use the garage, and so it doesn't cost us money, and it means we don't have to, well, much money. It does cost us money, obviously, but it means we can afford to sort of do it without having any other agenda put onto it, and we're able to give the artist fit to free and like cover the costs, whatever, out of our own pocket. So it means that we're not beholden to sort of getting funding from other places or rent or whatever. So for this period, we can sort of just like sit tight basically and not do anything. So it's not possible, and that's fine. And when we can, we will, and it'll be good or whatever. Hopefully that would be nice. Yeah,
that's really interesting. Fingers crossed for like more physical exhibitions in the future. Does anyone have any other questions? A way to ask as well, if you want to put your hand up, and I noticed Zoe, you've got your hand up if you've got a question.
Oh yeah, I was thinking about like, Lucy, you kind of talked about the relationship between the audience and weather, and a lot of like the galleries kind of have this spill out into the outside. And I know in LUVA, like a lot of what we show is quite dependent on the weather and that kind of thing. And also, so I was wondering about that kind of maybe programming in relation to the weather, but also the garage as well. Like it seems like a lot of these spaces are in garages, which seems interesting. But yeah, maybe just, I was kind of wondering about that.
I guess what you said about programming with weather, that's quite nice. And I guess it's almost like collaborating with the weather as well, or in a way how you sort of collaborate with a garden, or you work in seasonal cycles, or even like lunar farming cycles. And I think for me, the weather was something that I was sort of scared of, but I was like, I can't be. I'm putting art into a garden with no roof, and very much, I don't know, nature being aside and the human, you know, being all about the human. Actually, it's quite interesting how maybe the space decenters the human, and I guess the outdoors nature becomes a bit more of like a protagonist or the artist. But yeah, I guess programming, winter came, and that was sort of recognizing this dormant phase perhaps of the garden, or plants being cut down. But I think even that dormant, empty sort of plant bed's a really interesting thing, and this rewilding and sometimes letting things reside a little bit, how I guess with broccoli gardens, with what's going on with COVID, you know, you've sort of got this strange moment of not being able to put on shows, but even that within itself, what it offers for you guys to reflect and have a bit of time, and you know, you're still chatting to artists perhaps in a different way through a Zoom, but then you're able to get in touch with an artist from overseas. So I think maybe that there's sort of pros and cons, I guess, to all the bits, but I think the fluctuating pace of programming is definitely something that both COVID have sort of brought with them.
Thank you. And to finish on, I've got a question for Convenience Gallery as well. So being like located in a like market space, how do you encourage like the engagement and like participation of not just like your local art community, but like the wider community as well?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, so we're not actually like located in the market anymore. So we're now located on a warehouse within this charity. But specifically within the case of the market, we actually predominantly had more engagement from the wider public than we did from the arts community, which sort of flipped it on our head for us. So it's sort of like, because it was placed within their sort of daily landscape of like nipping out to the shops and seeing what was around, we were just placed like directly and squarely within that. And so for us, it was like super interesting. So every day it was a conversation with people, and like a lot of the time people were just confused about what we were doing, which was fine. But yeah, just like, it's really great for us to have those conversations and sort of like engage people like that are sort of outside of the art world. And we, you know, I had conversations with so many people who were like, oh, I'm a photographer, but I've never wanted to show anything in a gallery. I've never understood how I could do anything like that. Or someone who sort of came up and was like, oh, what is this? I don't understand what this is. And then went on to sort of tell us that he went home and did like Japanese inspired illustration and stuff like that. So you know, sometimes we was like kind of faced with like adversity in that setting that then ended up like turning into these sort of like really interesting encounters with people. And the arts community, because we weren't able to do like proper openings within that space, we didn't have as much interaction with. So for us, that was sort of what led us to be like squarely based more within the community. And within our new space, again, like we have 100 members who come to the Open Door charity a week. So when our programming's in there, like they get to engage with that. But within this space, we're able to have more openings and stuff, which means we get the art audience over. So it's a good mix. But I'd definitely say in a lot of cases, we probably have more engagement with the public than we do with the sort of proverbial art world. If that answers the question, all right. But
yeah, it's nice that you can have these kind of conversations with people, and then you find out more information about them, like you say with the photographer and the person that's done like Japanese illustrations. It's nice that you can kind of have this communication with them and get to know more. I think there's a question from Anne-Marie as well.
Oh, hello, can you hear me? Hello. I couldn't let this pass without saying just hello. And really great to see all of you, and thank you, LUVA. I think this is such a great idea, and to see some familiar faces here for me. So the one thing some of the people that are nothing to do at CSM won't know is that I'm one of the people that work on this mysterious DPS course that you've been hearing about and wondering what on earth that might mean. But I'm wondering what you might think of an observation I've made actually about from the current DPS students, that I think a lot more of the activity this year in lockdown has actually probably been from artist-run galleries more than anywhere else, more than museums, more than commercial galleries and all the kinds of obvious things that we may expect. And I'm wondering your observations, I mean, on your own experience, but maybe also peers, other people you know involved in artist-run galleries and projects, about why you think that's so, you know, because there's something about the nimbleness that you've all got to reconfigure yourselves. You know, that has actually been quite a freedom at the moment, perhaps more than many other kinds of projects. So I wanted to ask this question about artist-run projects and nimbleness and freedom, and whether you agree or whether you observe it also in maybe other artist-run gallery projects that you may be in contact with as well. I might be wrong, so just to wonder. And hello.
Should I say something about that? I mean, I'm not a great example because I'm not doing an awful lot right now, but so in my opinion, my experience from having, you know, my own space is that I'm not tied into, you know, the bureaucracy of having to do things right. And I really take issue with having to do things properly. And, you know, I sort of say to artists, don't send me an application that you've worked hours on, just come and speak. So I try and work around not doing things properly, and also being self-funded. I don't have to deliver, you know, until I get Arts Council funding for a certain project, I don't have to deliver, you know, to targets and things for people. So I think that's possibly, in my opinion, why we've been able to be more nimble, is because we're not tied into a system like you would be in a gallery space and having to ask permissions to do this or having to do things by the book. And this, you know, there's a real sense of freedom in being a space like we all have, I think. I don't know if you guys agree.
Yeah. Can I say something on the flip side? I work for a commercial gallery. I won't name names or anything, but peak pandemic, it was like panic stations. It was like, we need to like sell. I mean, I don't really involve myself on that side of things. I'm just a technician, but it was quite a worrying moment. So because there's obviously huge bills for the space. You got to pay your artist. Well, you got to try and pay your artist if you can sell the work. You got to pay all the stuff. So I guess obviously myself and Billy, we don't get paid. We don't. There's no money exchange. So yeah, we were just able to sit tight. There was such like a panic, like a huge level of panic, which we were able just to not have to fret about, because we don't really rely on clients. Anyway, sorry, that maybe isn't that relevant.
Can I also say quickly that I think, yeah, because we're not beholden to sort of make it work as a business or like make money or anything. I mean, shows have been, I think generally in London, at least in my experience, have been getting like worse and more boring anyway, because they're more and more centered around capital. So this is going to exacerbate that more. So the shows that we'll be putting on in these spaces will also be more interesting and like vital, and the better shows. So it's just gonna, yeah, I think.
Yeah, unless anyone has like any other questions or anything else to say, I'd just like to wrap up and like say thank you to all of our speakers. Thank you to Gardens, Lucy McGregor with the Garden Wall Project, Convenience Gallery, Lockdown Visual Arts, and Lock in Brighton. Thank you all for your time and your like presentations. I think it's been really nice to like learn more about each space. So yeah, thank you.
And thank you for organising as well.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, cheers. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks. Right, take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.